Another thing that we can do that is essentially miraculous is the idea of manufacturing optimism. This is a concept that I learned years ago from a guy named Dennis Waitley. He has an audio program that's very famous that's called The Psychology of Winning. And Dennis Waitley has worked with Olympic athletes and just a lot of high performance people. And he's trying to figure out what is it that allows these people to have high levels of performance and consistent performance and stamina, whereas the average person, can't even get themselves to go out for a walk every day. And one of the things that he found is that athletes and people that perform at high levels have the ability to literally manufacture their own optimism. They create optimism. Now, if you're not naturally an optimistic person, you might say, oh, why would you want to do that? Or isn't it artificial? And so forth and so on. Brian Tracey has a great example, and he says, if, let's say that you had a hard week of work, and you were discouraged because things weren't going very well, and you weren't making any sales, and you were worried about finances, and you were all bummed out, and you called home, and your spouse said, well, you know what? You don't have to worry about any of that because we just won the lottery. We just won $10 million in the lottery, and all of our problems are solved, and you don't have to worry. And you said, oh, that's fantastic. And you got all excited, and after the phone call, let's say you drove home, you thought about all the things you were going to buy, you thought about the house you were going to get, you thought about how, oh, you're on easy street now, and you felt all of this optimism, and then you got home, and your spouse said to you, you know what, I was just kidding around. But you sounded so bummed out that I had to do something to cheer you up, and I thought, why not tell you that we won the lottery? Now, after you got finished killing your spouse, you have to ask yourself, was the joy and the optimism that you experienced when you thought that you won the lottery and you thought that you had $10 million in cash waiting for you, was that real? Was it authentic? And I think that you'll come to the realization that it was. That when you're feeling an emotion, it is real for you in the moment. Now, it turns out that some people can manufacture optimism even when they're in the most dire and the most horrible of situations. Most people would think of these situations as dire and horrible. If you've read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, you'll read about how this guy who's in a concentration camp in the worst possible environment, in the most depressing and humiliating and cold and rough and, just the worst situation a human could probably be in, how he finds joy and he finds optimism and enthusiasm in the smallest thing. He gets an extra pea in his soup when he gets his bowl of soup, and he can find joy in that. And it really turns out you learn that optimism and joy all come from internal comparison, of comparing where you are to where other people are or where you could be, and you learn that it is possible to think about things differently and to make yourself feel more optimistic, to feel more inspired and more energized. Here are a couple of tips for how to do that. So number one, the way to make yourself feel bad is to think about people who have it better than you. Think about how good things used to be and look at how bad things are now. Okay? If you look at how things are bad for you and how they're good for other people, you can almost guarantee that you will feel bad. It's a universal. Okay? So the way we torture ourselves with this is when someone else gets a raise at work and we think we deserve a raise, we flip out and we get all upset and we say, oh, they didn't deserve it, I deserve that raise. Instead of saying, what is positive in this situation? And saying, there's these 5 other people and I make more money than them, and I really should feel very good about this. I actually was working with someone recently who's a trained evolutionary psychologist who is a brilliant expert and who knows all of these things about all these biases and how we make decisions and knows about all the experiments and knows about this contrast thing. And we were negotiating to have this person do some work with me. And we were negotiating it and we were making some good progress. And then they came back to me and they said, well, you know what? Actually, what I'd like to do is I'd like to be paid what you paid this other person who you worked with in the past a couple of years ago. And I said, wow, where did that come from? And I realized that this person heard that I had paid some other person for another project, a certain amount. And again, a trained psychologist, right? Someone who's been doing this all their life and knows how irrational that is and how ridiculous, all of a sudden just said, nope, you know what? Forget all that stuff we were talking about. I want to be paid what they were paid. So this is, it's kind of a, you might almost call it a natural thing for us to do because we tend to do it so often and we just get pulled to it, but it will really rob you of your enthusiasm. So number one, stop comparing yourself to people who have it better. Stop looking at how bad things are. Stop focusing on that and instead switch the whole situation around and start looking at how good you have it. As soon as you find yourself looking at how things are unfair or how someone has it better than you or how someone got lucky and did well and you should have done, as soon as you catch it, stop and say, wait a minute. Let me look at all the people that have it worse than me. Let me look at people who are less fortunate than me. Let me look at people who, what I'm experiencing, they would look at me and say, wow, that's unfair that you have all of that. And as soon as you switch your perception, you'll notice that your emotional and your psychological state will change instantly. Okay, so focus on where you have it good and focus on where you have it better than others. Notice that. It's good for the soul as well. Another great technique that I've learned is noticing how far you've come rather than looking at how far you have to go. If you're working on a project in business and you look out and you say, wow, look at all that work we have left to do, you're going to get that response of, man, I don't want to do all that stuff. Whereas if you look back and you say, okay, let me think about where we started and let me look at all the progress we've made, that will really energize you. I once read about the CEO of one of the big corporations in America. I think it was the CEO of the Levi Strauss Company, if I recall. He actually keeps a journal, and every time he has a great accomplishment, he writes it down in the journal. And he's got page after page. He's got hundreds and hundreds of these. Every time he has a great accomplishment, he just writes it down. And he goes through on a regular basis, and he just notices how much progress he's made in his life. People that are chronically unhappy are always looking at how far they've got to go, where they're at, and how they're never going to get where they're trying to go. Dan Sullivan, the guy who started the Strategic Coach, who's one of the most brilliant trainers of entrepreneurs that's ever lived, he calls this the gap. And he says that we make these idealistic futures that we have, we create in our minds, and then we say, oh, look at how far I am from it, or we perform, and then we go, oh, I didn't live up to my standards, and we make ourselves feel bad, rather than looking back at where we started, and then we perform and we say, wow, look at how much progress we've made. So looking at how far you've come, not how far you go, is intrinsically inspiring, energizing, and motivating. Okay, so start looking at how far you've come. Start focusing on how far you've come because it'll inspire you to, today, take some more steps to get a little bit further. And then when you notice how far you've gotten there, it'll inspire you to go a little bit further. And every once in a while, take a look out into the future and say, yeah, I'm going to climb that mountain, but don't get focused on it in a way that takes your energy away and makes you feel uninspired and demotivates you.